right, it is officially 2 p.m. Eastern. We have a lot to talk about, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Thank you all for joining. We are going to welcome questions at the end, but that doesn't mean you have to wait to the end to ask them. So if you hover your mouse along the bottom, there's two ways you can submit a question. One is the Q&A, which sends questions directly to Krista, who will be standing by, or you can put them in the chat if you wanted more of a community interaction. We'll capture both and then go through whatever questions we can at the end. I want to thank you all for joining, and certainly my esteemed panel, my guests, which will do some quick introductions and then kick off our discussion around disruption and change, which is my theme for the year. Angela, would you like to start?
Absolutely. Jim Degnan. I'm the president of SW Anderson. Been in the fastener industry for 35 plus years, if you will. Love the industry, not just for what we do, but for the folks, for the people that are in the industry. It's a great industry to work in. Excited to participate in the conversation, and it is a very relevant topic, Lonni. You hit the nail on the head with this one.
Great. Angela?
Okay, hi, I'm Angela Philippart. I'm the Vice President of Supply Chain at AFC Industries. I've been in the fastener industry for 27 years. All in fastener distribution is my background. Purchasing and material planning primarily has been my focus.
Wonderful. And Tim?
Yeah, Tim Roberto, Division President of Star Stainless, Division of Linfast Solutions Group. I've been in the industry for 32 years. This was actually my college job. I started in the warehouse at Star Stainless, and now I somehow am running this company. So it's a crazy world.
What a great story. For anyone I have not yet met, Lonni Kieffer from SmartCert. I'm one of the co-founders. I'm usually on the training and customer success and support side of things. So when we talk about change management, we live and breathe that on a daily basis. For some technology similar to SmartCert, you can learn it in 5 minutes. It's the change management and the process updates that require a little bit more time, and that's really where Krista and I come in. But you know, I think to kick off the conversation, we know there's been a lot of progress with technology. I think about when email was first introduced, and I'll date myself a little bit, but I was living in Washington, D.C., and we had bike messengers send paperwork back and forth to our customers. Like, imagine that. So technology, I think, since things like email have certainly posed challenges, but have created opportunities as well. So everybody's trying to understand what disruption looks like, how companies should handle it. I don't think there's ever a right or wrong answer or a universal answer, if you will. So putting this panel together today is really meant to kind of provide perspective, because I think if there's something that we're all aware of, it feels really noisy and chaotic right now. There's a lot of technologies to choose from. There's a lot of impacts to business. Things are moving quickly. And I thought, what a great group of people to put together just to kind of speak through disruption and how to lead through it, what to think about, and how to kind of move fear out of the way. So with that, first question that I'm actually going to pose to our friend Jim. What would you say are the major sources of disruption for the fastener industry?
Well, some of the more obvious ones would be supply chain disruptions, like we went through with the pandemic, or natural disasters, earthquakes like we just had over in Taiwan, or labor shortages. Those are probably the most common and well-known disruptions. I can't get the product, so I'm scrambling, looking for other sources and the like. But there's also other disruptions in changes in technologies. And you were talking about technology when we went from taking orders over the phone to all of a sudden they're starting to fax stuff to us, to they're going through EDI and staying ahead of the customer requirements on how they want to communicate, how they want to do business. So those are also levels of disruptions. But some of the ones that we're seeing more recently also apply to customer requirements. Before, if it was this long and about this diameter and had threads on it, it was good. Now it's I want prints on everything. I want specs on everything. It used to be that, yes, it complies with this ANSI spec, but now we want paperwork on it. Certifications are much further than just the aerospace and automobile market. It's becoming much more of the norm instead of the exception. So yeah, changes and disruptions on a regular basis in the industry that most people think is pick, pack, and ship and relatively straightforward, but we're dealing with curveballs on a daily basis.
That is so true. Tim, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think Jim covered a whole lot of it and the important aspects. One thing I would add to that is just a concern as we've become such a global economy. Our reliance on imports is huge, and our lack of capacity at the ports is always going to continue to be an issue. Any little thing that you see happen at the ports, like backlashes in so many different ways, I think as we continue to deal with inputs, because everybody thinks, well, yeah, we're not going to import the fasteners. Well, why are you going to import the smelting? All these other things. We rely on so many aspects of trade. One of the things that we're going to have to continue to look at in the U.S. is the infrastructure that we have to say, is that meeting our needs? It's just like I remember when I was living in LA, they made the 5 freeway with like 2 lanes, and they never thought, hey, this is going to grow and the capacity is going to grow and there's going to be more people living here. For us, we have to have that like foresight to be able to see where things going. And I would hope that we would get ahead of this, because to me, that's always one of your biggest concerns is your lack of capacity in bringing stuff in from overseas.
Absolutely. Angela, head of supply chain, I'm sure you can add some detail to the conversation.
Yeah, I think that, kind of to what Jim and Tim are saying, with the port congestion and, things going on with, say, the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal, like you're seeing longer lead times. And, for a lot of companies who are focused on, inventory reduction and return, inventory levels getting back to like pre-pandemic levels, right now, like that's something that I think is potentially a constraint and people need to be mindful of. With higher interest rates, I mean, that makes it more expensive, cost of carrying inventories. And so, I don't really think the port congestion issues are going to go away. I know that the contract on the West Coast is up for negotiation in the fall. I mean, that we have that potentially looming out there. So I think we just have to like really be mindful of that and from an inventory standpoint and the potential impacts that could have on our customers.
Absolutely. If I were to segue or kind of add on that question a little bit, I'm coming from the position of being a technology disruptor. And, we've seen in our 3 years now, the early adopters, those who want to keep up with the early adopters, those who want to wait it out, and those who are like looking away from technology simply because I think valid points of business is too busy for us to transition processes, but there's risk associated with not paying attention and not trying to keep up. So when we think about the challenges that it presents traditional businesses, what do you think they're facing today? Tim?
Yeah, so to that point, I think for businesses, we have to see what's out there. We have to be willing to do that. I think change is always going to be hard. Change is difficult because we're humans. Humans love complacency. We love to get comfortable. We love routine. We love those aspects of it. But business is anything but routine, because you're dealing with human behavior and expectation that's going to continue to adapt, and it's really fluid. So for you, you have to be as fluid in your business, and it's thinking differently. It's having different inputs. It's hearing different voices. Even as a leader, I think it's important of having a team that's willing to challenge you on the things that you see, because we have our own blinders, we have our own biases, and so for us, it literally is allowing those voices to take place and have a place at the table to hear things differently. I mean, one of the things that we've had to do in the last couple of years is like go through that brainstorming process of what are these things that are out there, what are possible, what are things that we're seeing, And for us, it's throwing out there and saying, likely, how is that going to happen? How is that going to unfold? And then let's get a system in place that can make that happen. And it literally is looking at things differently. And so for me, it's from the person who's like pulling the orders to the lead, the CEO. Each person has to have that voice to kind of have an input and have to be heard. And I think that's important.
That's such an important topic. I think even as we're transitioning teams, it's usually from the top down, right? So there's an ROI plan or there's an efficiency goal, but what does it mean for the person doing the work every day? And I think you mentioned that personalized approach. I think you'll have so much more success if you can speak to what's in it for them, even if it's more of a long-term goal, right? Like, we're transitioning over this time, but here's where we're going to get you. And it's probably going to mean that you're going to have more time for the work that matters, the work you were hired for, the work you love. Jim, what would you add to that?
Well, communication is the key, Lonnie. Absolutely agree. The what's in it for me. You're changing what I do on a day in and day out basis to what end, and what is it? How is it going to benefit me? And making things more efficient, and being able to process more orders or whatever, do more fulfillments is one thing. But for those frontline folks, they really want to, to the extent that you can, show them a piece of the big picture. If we can do this, then we can spend more time addressing customer requirements, actually talking to people, not just emailing them back and forth, and working on some of those aspects of the transaction that may not get the time of day because we're so busy doing the manual pieces of it. So the communication on the change, the justifications for the change, and they say, you got to tell somebody, 99 times before it sinks in. I might be a little bit higher than that. But to the extent that you can do that with your team and over communicate, because that's what they want to hear. That they want to hear the reasons for it. So any good change management, I think it starts with communications and communicating the way that people want to be communicated to, not just the way you're comfortable with.
Amen. Angela, what would you add to that?
I think just it's important to be able to explain, the business need for the change. As leaders, I think it's really important to understand how critical the human dynamics are in affecting the final results of that change. I think creating accountability for the team so that we don't easily fall back into old ways of doing things, and reinforcing the progress that we're making. And I think just, understanding that, not being able to respond quickly to change really puts us at a disadvantage as a company.
Yes, I would agree to that. So you guys have adopted technology, updated processes. How has your company adapted? Talk a little bit about maybe some personal experiences as you've made the transition. Angela, I'll tee it back to you.
I think it's really like, so companies today, like we have, access to more data than like we ever have in the past, right? And so I think the challenge is how do we like best utilize all the data that's available to us, in being efficient, in being able to, utilize analytics. I know AI is, something that's extremely popular right now, being able to read, understand, and correlate the data. But that in itself also presents some challenges because it's also understanding, understanding AI algorithms and, are they making biased or, unwise, recommendations,
Right.
so it's really like, I think understanding that as a company, if you're going to use, those types of technologies. I went to, I am part of Association for Supply Chain Management, and one of the professors that was speaking, I thought something he said, it's kind of stuck with me, is that, technology is really an enhancer. It's not a replacement. And I think that was like super key takeaway for me, because, I think sometimes we're looking for like the magic bullet, the fix for, what our problems are. But I think that it's really understanding how technology can enhance what like we already do and what we know, and how we can improve upon, those things.
Yes. Jim.
Absolutely agree. without the people in the business, it doesn't work. It doesn't run. So the technology is not there to replace people. It's there to make them more efficient and, again, leverage their time and give them more information, not just data. To Angela's point, ton of data out there now. And the ability to not just put a report out there, but to put business intelligence in front of people so they can make informed decisions to better serve the customers is key. I mean, and as we go from the old green screen computers and the tractor-fed paper to graphical user interfaces with ERPs that are web-enabled that you can run them off your phone, to taking advantage of AI sitting on databases. I mean, it's the acceleration on the technology has been significant, but we still pick, pack, and ship, right? So our core business is to buy from manufacturers, help manufacturers on the selection. So to the extent that your folks can add value to that by leveraging the data, by using technology to help them leverage that data, I think is going to put you a leg up relative to your competition.
Yeah, I think you guys made really valid points. If we're doing more automation around getting to the data, it's probably a big part of the day that was spent in spreadsheets, and even assisting with the analysis, removing a lot of the manual piece of this is just going to be able to help move things faster. Tim, what would you add?
Yeah, so I think Angela brings up the great point of data. It's great having the data, but how are we going to utilize the data we have? Otherwise, it's just data overload for us. That was a big change in the last year and a half. We have a lot more data than we've ever had before at Star, and it's a good thing because there's an accountability to simply say, why are we doing the things we've done? It literally is trying to make sense. And to Angela's point before is, what's the business purpose for the things we're doing? Why are we doing what we're doing, and how maybe can we do that better? Process improvement is huge, and we have to take a look at that. As Jim was saying earlier, communication is going to be key. And for us, some of the things, one of the personal stories I'll take away for technology was just listening to some of our order pullers and what they had to go through to pull an order, and the manual points that had to take place for that to take place. And it was like, man, this this doesn't make sense. These poor people, we're asking them to do more, and yet we're making it more difficult for what they're doing. So what are ways that we could utilize technology? Well, we're utilizing the scanners. We're going to be working with SmartCert to be able to bring about the MTRs as well. And so those are aspects where, like, in listening to people's stories, hearing what they're going through, rather than just pushing numbers at them, saying, hey, where can we be better as a company? They're giving us this feedback. Well, then we make it a priority, and now we're making that happen. So I think it literally is listening to what's going on, seeing what that's going to take to then implement it, and then having the courage to go out there and say, we're going to have to do it differently. Because I think one of the greatest detriments to a company is just continuing to do things the way you've always done it. That becomes outdated, and you become archaic, and how sad that is. And I know for Star, we always are seen as archaic, but at the same time, we're looking at these new adaptations of, like, how do we need to do business in this current market? Yes.
You know, one of the things that we've heard over the last few years is we're going to build it ourselves. And there's a case for building something custom to your business, but there's also, I think, Tim, you mentioned it, like, everything's moving so quickly. To be able to support and keep up with that versus lean into the tools that have been built to support the industry. I think, where our conversation really focuses on is, where can we make an impact? We've been devoted to the fastener industry for 3 years. So we've now aligned with workflows from what you receive to what goes out the door. And, the AI piece of that is a huge piece, because we know repetitive tasks, manual tasks, human error are a goal for everyone to solve for. But no one wants to spend a year teaching AI how to read their documents, because that in and of itself becomes inefficient. So I always think about, where can you partner with tools and technology that are going to help move your business forward and not require you to maintain and keep up with the advancements in technology? I mean, we just incorporated AI into SmartCert, but it's, again, building that awareness on not only maybe what others are doing, your partners in the business, but where the industry is going, and just creating enough awareness about where that fits in and when it does as well. Anything you guys want to add to that before we move on? We're good.
No.
So we talked about risk management and decision-making when there is a lot of uncertainty and disruption. I can go back to COVID and talk a little bit about amazing movement because of the fact that we were all forced to make decisions so quickly and respond to a lot of uncertainty. What is your approach to decision-making and risk management with that uncertainty? Tim, I'll key that one up to you.
Yeah, so first and foremost, it's recognizing what risks do we face, and like trying to come up with different risks of what that can look like in business interruption, and then how are ways that we can continue to address each of those things as they come up. What would it look like to the points we talked about before, supply chain? What are contingencies? And so for every like plan you have, there's always that contingency plan as well that you need to work in so that if something comes, you're adapting to it as it comes. And it's recognizing we can't literally figure out everything that's going to come, but we have to say, how are we training our people to be adaptable to the situations that they're facing? And so it's literally teaching them to almost have this true sense of critical thinking. As you face it, what are you going to do? How are you going to continue to do that? And then trust them to be able to do that. I think for us, sometimes it's hard because you want to control and manage everything, but at the same time, we have good people who have great ideas and great resources. And we saw that in the pandemic where we had to think on the fly of how are we going to get people to work from home when we never had that process before. And it was like in a matter of days. And so for us, it was like implementing some of the ideas and the people that were in the right places and the right things to be able to make that happen. I think it literally is that fluidity of listening to the ideas people have and then trusting them to implement those, like looking over that's going to be and knowing that I don't have to have all the answers because I have right people who are going to help me as well.
Yes, Jim.
Yeah, Tim, I absolutely agree. Allowing the frontline folks to make decisions, critical decisions for their customers on the fly when a curveball comes in is empowering them to make that is definitely something that's going to keep you ahead of the curve, if you will. When those tough decisions come in, especially in those uncertain times, our typical process is to collect as much information that you can, just the facts, not the emotion, right? Just the facts. But then we also take a look at what is, and Tim, you mentioned this, what is the best case and what's the worst case? So what's our range of what could go wrong or what could go right? Then make a decision, move forward with it, but also more, and just as importantly, be willing to change it. Be willing to say, okay, that we screwed that up. Let's back up and try something else because that didn't work. Be willing to make mistakes, and we make a fair amount of them, right? But be willing to make them, learn from them, and move forward. If you have a culture where people are afraid to make mistakes, then they'll never make a decision because some decisions just wind up in mistakes. So, it really a lot of times gets down to empowering the employees, the culture you have. Hey, you know what? I give you an A for effort. The execution wasn't great, so let's change it and enhance it and make it better the next time around. And with that culture, then they're more willing to think outside the box the next time around. And then I think you wind up developing an organization that is more flexible, more nimble for those situations that we don't know what's going to happen next.
Right. Angela, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think, relationships come to mind. Relationship management is really like critical in navigating, uncertainty and disruption. If you want to think back to, the pandemic, like, we were all faced with having to make decisions. And, as leaders, we draw on our experiences to try and make the best decisions. And yet none of us had an experience of going through a pandemic before. There was no playbook to essentially refer to, of how to make decisions. And so, I think that the risks that were there, we weren't going to be able to transfer those risks to anyone else. We were going to have to share in them with our partners. And so I really think that having those strong partnerships, relationships with people, whether it's customers and suppliers, I think that really aided in coming up with solutions of, how we were going to, work through that. And so pandemic aside, I think that is just really critical going forward in maintaining the relationships, whether it's with your suppliers or customers, as different disruptions and uncertainties in the future, how we work through those things together as partners.
Yes. So when we think about obstacles that prevent companies from effectively adapting to all of this disruption, what do you think the biggest obstacles are in the fastener industry? Jim?
We've always done it this way. I don't know how many times I heard that right when I came over here 12 years ago. Well, why do we do it this way? Well, we've always done it this way. Well, what's the reason, right? So it was a little bit of they were comfortable in the process, they were comfortable in what was going on, and as change started to pick up, as we started to see some disruptions, then we really needed to say, okay, well, let's understand why we do things, not just because we've always done it that way. So rigid systems, I'll say rigid people, folks who are comfortable in an environment like I was talking about before, to make decisions, to make changes. I think that those are probably the biggest obstacles. The technology stuff is, Lonni, you know this better than any of us. It's relatively straightforward to implement. It's the people using the technologies to get the best out of it, and being comfortable with it, that is really the hard part of managing through disruptions. So, again, it gets down to the culture, gets down to the people, and empowering them to do their best to support the changes, to enhance the changes, to be a solution of that change, instead of an obstacle.
Angela, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think that being reactive to obstacles instead of proactive, I think that can be very costly. Granted, there's always things that potentially come up and you have to react to those things, but for a lot of people, I think that we can be proactive and think about potential risks that are out there, and how do we potentially mitigate that. And I think, though, in that same regard, if as you're being strategic and thinking about the potential risks, not having buy-in from other people in your organization as to what those risks are, or the actions that we need to take to potentially mitigate those risks, I think those could be very costly.
Tim, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I think adding on to what Jim said is taking a little step further is that sense of groupthink, that like we get into that mode and model where we all kind of think the same because we're so used to it. That culture has trained us to kind of build into that same mentality. And so it really is disrupting that groupthink. And that's hard sometimes because it's thinking of things that you wouldn't normally come up with. And so it's having those contrarian voices that are thinking a little bit differently are important to be able to question the things that we're doing, the processes that we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, that, brings up a valid point that I know everyone's facing, and that's the labor shortage as the boomers are retiring, and you're working to entice the younger generation. Can we talk a little bit about what that looks like from a support perspective, how you help transition generations when you are thinking about technology and kind of meeting everyone where they're at? Tim, do you want to start off?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's again adapting systems and mentalities for being flexible, and I think that's hard. But it's listening to the needs of the newer generation, what's coming in, and seeing what still helps us be the company that we are and get those things done. There's certain things that, again, it goes to the strengths of your company. There's certain strategies and strategic management you have to maintain, but there's also other areas where it's like, okay, these aren't as important. So it's understanding what are the priorities of your company, what are the important things, and what are areas that we can be a little bit more flexible. And in those areas, offer it. Don't just do it because that's the way we've always done it. It's like build in that sense of flexibility, build in that sense of accountability, which is important, but also that sense of reward, that like there's opportunities for those who come in and can think differently, can perform differently. So I think it literally is continuing to process and really analyze the way you're doing things and the way you're going to market. I think that's important.
Yeah. Angela.
Just to add a little bit to what Tim's saying, I think having the right leadership in place to be able to set the expectations and the guardrails for people, right? Like I hate when I hear someone say like, well, the rule is, and I'm like, no, there are no rules, right? Like these are guidelines to, guide us to try and make the best decision that supports the organization and supports our customers. So I just think that, we coach people through, those situations.
Jim.
I would say that the younger generations coming in definitely do things differently than every generation does them differently, and leveraging their skill sets is important, but also keeping the guardrails up, if you will, on this is who we are and this is why we do things. Now, if we want to go about it differently because of the skill sets that the new generation comes to play with, then great. But this is the objective, and this is what we're trying to get to. The methods of communication, what they're comfortable with. Again, it changes by generation. I mean, we have folks that would rather text than be face to face. We have folks that don't know how to text, right? So, so communicating the way that people are most comfortable, that it's the most effective, but then also getting them comfortable in their environment so they can contribute the best that they can, regardless of what their comfort levels are.
I love that. And I guess it kind of brings me back to the culture and company perspective. We've been spending a lot of time on that, but I think it's so critical to the future because of how much transformation is required and because of that nimbleness and flexibility that you really need leaders to have. So when you think about leading change within your organization, what really are the most critical qualities you look for in those team members to lead along with you? Jim?
I'll start with communication. You have to be a good communicator. You have to communicate your thoughts. You have to communicate your ideas. You have to listen. You have to participate in the conversations so that we can come up with a good direction, a good enhancement to the organization, review of policy, review of procedures. It has to be good communication. So I think that's one of the keys that I look for is a good communicator.
Tim, what's important with your leadership when we think about everything from a business perspective today?
Yeah, I think communication is key. Jim's still the best answer, but I'll take it a step further and just honing in those skills for emotional intelligence. I think emotional intelligence is underestimated in business. I think being able to read people, to understand people, to know how the message is being received rather than just given. And so I think it's got to go both ways. A good communicator is not just focus on how it's being projected, but also how is that being received.
Yeah, I think about that a lot too when I talk again about the top-down decisions that are being made, and I see and support companies. When you think about, the leaders who are rolling up their sleeves and want to understand the day-to-day because they know that these are the people that are going to be most affected and they need to be supported, and it does need to be personal, is where the success is made. Angela, what would you like to add to this?
Yeah, I think that when you're looking at leaders, I think it's important that it's someone who has the ability to be, strategic and also be able to add to our culture, with people who are aligned and share the same values that we have as an organization. Things that, accountability, respect, integrity, value creation, all of those things are really important to the culture of the management team at AFC. And so when, we're adding leaders, making sure that they're going to be a strong fit to the culture. But again, I think also someone who has the ability to be strategic, because, there's really strong leaders out there that are managers really who are more tactical. And there's a need for that, right? But there's a difference between being tactical and strategic. And with the way our organization is growing, we absolutely have to be strategic and looking, where we're going and how we're going to do that with the leaders we have.
Agree. I want to switch to partners. When you think about who to lock arms with in the industry, what does that look like as you guys are navigating through transitions and updating processes? Where do your partnerships come into play? Tim?
Yeah, I think when identifying partners is as important as identifying employees. It's that sense, are they aligned with our values? Or are they looking for the same aspects? Or are they communicating well? And I think it really is, because that's an offset of your company and it's a reflection of your company. the people that you align with. And I think it's important to think about those aspects of it. For us, that's been the big thing from vendors to suppliers for technology as well. It's looking at people who are seeing things the same way that we would, and helping us also to continue to grow, to challenge us in other ways as well, to help us to see ways that we can continue to improve and not be afraid to speak up, especially as that partner.
Angela.
Yeah, so, we want to see our partners win alongside us, whether that's our suppliers or customers, right? And so, we want to make sure, like, again, we're being proactive in the relationships that we have, the people that we're choosing to align and partner with, we're going to have open and honest communication with. I think we've all worked with a supplier or a customer that we only talk when there's issues. And we want to get beyond that, with the people that we're choosing to align with, right? And so we want to make sure that we're actively, developing the relationship together. I think that helps to mitigate the risks, and it helps us to have more wins together.
From my perspective, and then Jim, I'll certainly let you weigh in, is, if you're asking someone to do something different because you see the benefit, but there's also value, I think communication, as we continue to say, is key to that. If you are, again, changing the way you're sending certs, I'll use SmartCert as the example, but it means that your customers are going to also have to change. I think so much of what our focus has been is we're asking them to do something different, and everyone's sensitive to that. But if you lead with the value of what it's going to mean to their business, move parts faster, stop, all the communication and missing paperwork and all of that, it becomes an opportunity for growth and certainly efficiency among the supply chain as well. So Jim, what would you add to that?
Absolutely. I'll just leverage what you were just saying, Lonnie, the alignment of the value prop, whether it's a product supplier, a service provider, on the customer side, if we're all looking at the value prop through that supply chain the same way, and there's tight alignment there, then everybody's on the same page, and then everybody understands it. Specific to the service providers, the software folks that we like to partner with, we like to get an accelerator out of them. We like them to say, okay, bring something, help us accelerate. We're aligned in the direction, but gosh, put some fuel behind it and help us get there faster and smarter and better, because you're bringing a lot more to the table in that certain categories than we are. So help us accelerate, but there has to be alignment on that strategic objectives first.
Yes. So we have maybe 10 minutes left, a little less, and then we'll open it up to questions. But, when you think about where the industry is going, and I feel like there's been a lot of progress in a very short amount of time, which COVID has certainly accelerated. Where do you think are the most significant opportunities for growth and innovation, and how are you going to take advantage of them? Jim, back to you.
Well, we're again pretty straightforward, right? We move product, we move money back and forth, and we also move information back and forth. And I think it's the information sharing piece of it that can not only leverage technology, but also get a lot better. Clear visibility throughout the entire supply chain would be ideal, and not just with our customers, but their customers too. And whether that requires some blockchain technology or something, I don't know, but better visibility throughout the whole process, because we're literally trying to keep that chain moving instead of having piles coiled up on the floor, because it's expensive, Angela, to your earlier point, to sit on inventory, but we also want it to be responsive to be able to handle spikes in demand and disruptions in that chain. So I think that utilizing technology to give us better visibility throughout the entire supply chain would be something that the industry would definitely benefit from.
Music to my ears, of course, to anyone on my team's ears. When we think about where the industry is going, I think it's also going to not only have visibility requirements, but traceability as well will increase. There's certainly, bad actors out there who have introduced counterfeit parts over the last year. There's missing bolts. there's the need to act quickly, and paperwork is usually a big part of trying to get to the answers and solve problems. So when we think about where the industry is moving forward, the visibility and the traceability are huge. And then it's the security of things. I can't tell you how many times I hear from someone that's like, I received this email with certs, but I don't know if it's fake, and I'm going to click on something and I'm going to blow up my company. There's so much coming at us on a daily basis. And I think the security aspect of our electronic communication is also going through its own iterations. Much of that, unfortunately, is reactive, but things like CMMC and where the industry is going to try and take more control and protect companies, I think, is another area where we're going to see progress that's going to benefit everyone as well. Angela, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I know I touched earlier on, the amount of data, and I think that the ability to data analytics, we have access to so much data, to be able to analyze that, whether through AI or some other type of technology. But I think like the ability to be able to predict trends and potential risks, to identify opportunities for efficiencies in our processes, ability to predict, customer demand, as we are trying to leverage and manage our inventories, it improved integrated workflows as well, by being able to better understand the data.
Tim.
Yeah, I think Jim and Angela hit two key points. The only thing to add a little step further is just continuing to integrate workflow for the supplier and the customer. And what that looks like is shared information to be able to make it easier, show value, to offer that value, and to listen to the needs. I think for us, it's ultimately like working together to have that communication flow, the analytics of the data, but that's only as good as like what action does that take, and how does that make it easier for a customer at the end of the day? So how are we utilizing some of that to build some of those sticky points within our company so that we work closer together to make it that much easier for you? So it's literally trying to offset some of the workload that you have to do. That's what suppliers should be thinking about, is like, how am I making that job easier for you? I know for us at the end of the day, that's always what keeps us up at night, is how am I making it easier for our customers? And then being able to communicate that and then make it happen.
Yes. I'm going to encourage anyone to ask their questions. I'm going to make one last note on this. So, COVID took away what I think I understood is to be a key part of this industry, and that's the people equation, right? It's not necessarily the steak dinners, but it's the relationships that you're creating. And we certainly don't mind having a beverage or two. So thinking about the personalization of this, I think is what I love the most about the industry. And it's probably why the partnerships exist and the strength within the supply chain exists, is the people part of this. So we talked about internally, hiring champions and personalizing conversations with the workers that are going to make adjustments to the way they show up every day. But it's also locking arms with your suppliers and your customers, and your technology partners certainly are a piece of that. And I think it still comes down to the people. And I think this conversation has certainly supported that. And hopefully there's aspects of this from a takeaway perspective that can help maybe provide new perspective in facing a lot of the challenges that companies are today. Krista, how are we looking on questions?
I have one question so far. What aspects of business get replaced or become obsolete in the next 20 years? When you think about, Lonni mentioned email coming about, and kind of email taking a little bit of a backseat these days as new technologies come about, like SmartCert. What do you guys feel might be the next to go?
Good one. Jim?
I would say any repetitive task. Any task, whether it's done by an individual on a keyboard, whether it's done in the warehouse, any repetitive task, in my opinion, should be replaced by automation, so those individuals can add more value than just sitting down doing the same thing day after day after day. So I would look for technology to assist, and that's what we lean on with our technology partner, Lonni, right? Is anything that we're doing on the same thing over and over again, let's automate that so those folks can add more value to the conversation with customers, build those relationships, truly understand what their needs are, past what's just put on the piece of paper with a purchase order, and really deliver more value. So get rid of the repetitive tasks.
Yeah, it's usually not what they're hired for. It's part of the job. It's probably
Right, yeah.
the saddest part. So if you eliminate that, I think everyone wins for sure. Tim, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback, because I think Jim's right. To piggyback on that, it's going to be like a lot of that data entry is going to go away over a certain amount of time, because you have programs that are able to read so many different aspects between PDFs and everything else, and be able to input that data. Be able to eventually, it's going to get to a point where you'll be able to recognize the writing and those kinds of things. So a lot of that data input that we're having to do now that kills you, cross-reference the part numbers and all these other things that just like are so laborious. I think those are some of those areas that are going to be automatically gone, because people are seeing how much money that goes into your labor costs. I think it's looking for other aspects of being able to bring that to market.
Yeah, when Linden launched SmartCert, his goal is to get paper out of the boxes. We're now exchanging images of that paper, right? But the whole point behind things like AI and where we're going is to exchange the data itself, because that's really the true efficiency. So I completely agree with you. Angela, what would you add?
Yeah, I mean, really, I mean, Jim and Tim, what they were already talking about, I mean, I think that, yes, identifying some of those tactical things that are, maybe inefficiencies in our processes, and, how can we automate those? I think a lot about, every time, we touch something, there's a cost associated with that. And, so if we can automate, some of those processes, and have people focus on things that are more value add to the organization, I think that's, definitely the focus, right?
Absolutely.
We have a question from Robin Lieberman. There's a trend private equity has and is buying up distributors and manufacturers. How is that impacting you, and what are the pros and cons for your customers? We'll start.
Angela?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, AFC, we've acquired a few companies, and that's definitely something that's on our radar. And I think the important thing for I guess I can't say what the intention is behind other companies when they're acquiring companies, but AFC acquires companies that are doing well. We're not acquiring companies that like we have to go in and it's crisis management, and we have to like rescue things. They're running their company well. We're adding to what we're able to offer our customers. And so in doing that, there really is not a negative impact to our customer, because they're continuing to operate the way that they have. If anything, over time, as we start to integrate them into, the overall AFC philosophies, they really have access to a lot more, resources and knowledge, as we, bring in a lot of different people who have different experiences that they can share. And it's about, sharing best practices, and how we can become better as a company. As a customer, I see, acquisitions happening with a lot of our suppliers. And I think that it's really important, like from a purchasing standpoint, to be mindful of the relationships that you have with your suppliers, because you never know who's going to be acquired by someone else. I mean, you could have, maybe not the greatest relationship with a particular supplier, but next thing you know, they acquired someone you do have a really good relationship with. And so, those are things that are always like mindful to me, and in how we approach relationships, and how we're communicating, and working through, things that come up. So I don't think that it's going to lessen. I think we're going to continue to see, acquisitions on the manufacturing and the distribution side.
Jim, what would you add to that?
I agree with Angela. It really gets down to the intent of the private equity organization. What's their strategic objective? If it's to build a larger organization that provides more value to the customers by adding more products and services and capability, absolutely, it's a positive. It truly can be a positive. If it's to come in there and squeeze every dollar that they can out of it and flip it in 3 to 5 years by bolting it together and getting a higher PE ratio, then maybe not. Quite frankly, I think we're seeing more of the former than the latter, and that's a good thing. I mean, there is a lot of organizations, a lot of mom and pop distributors that are out there that would benefit from being part of a roll up from whether it's private equity or just a larger organization that are looking to add more folks to their team. So to me, it's a function of the intent of the acquisition, of the private equity, of the firm that's doing the acquiring, and what their long-term strategy is. But it can definitely be a positive. It's not always a negative.
Tim, what do you add?
Yeah, I think it's really getting to know like who that private equity is, what they have to offer. To us, there has been some changes, but I think like going back to one of my favorite movies, William Wallace, all the stories of who William Wallace was, like they're letting these stories dictate like what they think, and that this negative story of some monster taking over. But I think private equity is looking for the same thing every company is looking for, is to grow a company, to continue to help the bottom line. I hope that's what companies are looking to do, is to continue to grow in those aspects of it. And I think it's working together in that. For us, it was a huge change for us culturally to change from a family-owned business to private equity. But to Angela's point, we also saw a lot of the positives that came from it, things that we weren't tapping into before, distribution, logistics, different technology that we couldn't just do on our own. And so we're now tapped into the resource to be able to get things done we think would benefit the business. And that's exactly what we're going to look to do. So for us, it's understanding what private equity is trying to do. Is they really are, to Jim's point, they're trying to grow a company and they're trying to grow a business. And I think that's always a positive thing. How that goes to market, that's going to be on the private equity themselves to continue to build that with their customers. I think for us, we've seen a lot of the positives of it. And so for us, I like I said, I think there's definite things that could be had. And to Jim's point, definite companies that could attest to that. I'm not saying that that's the be all for everyone. That's not always the way it works. But at the same time, don't be afraid of what you don't know. Instead, get to know it.
Yeah.
Great. A couple other questions we'll run through. Someone asked, can you share thoughts on managing growing technology in business with employee fears of job loss? So a lot of what you just said with repetitive tasks, they might fear that, well, if they're replacing that with automation, there goes my job. So what are your thoughts on that?
Tim, you want to lead?
Yeah, I guess for start, there's a whole lot of technology changes going up. I mean, we finally got off of our fax machine, so that's good. So for us, there's definitely things that happen. And to your point, whoever asked the question, I'm not sure, but it's a great question because there's always that fear. I remember when we introduced e-commerce, it was that sense of, oh, you're going to get rid of salespeople. Heck no. Our salespeople have been telling us how busy they are and that they're just pushing paper. And it's like, that's not a salesperson. That's an order taker. We don't want an order taker. So we're going to use e-com to kind of offset some of the things that are going on, the quoting and those kinds of things, to go back to building those relationships. To your point earlier, Lonnie, it's people dealing with people. And so for us, we're going to utilize that time that you have to better utilize what we can do as our business and continue to grow that. So for us, it is actually the positives that come from that is like helping them to understand what that looks like, and growing a company overall just means more opportunities anyways.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jim.
Yeah, again, right in line with what Tim was saying, one of the questions we like to ask is, what would you rather be doing? What do you think, what activities do you want to do that can add more value to your conversations with customers? Well, I'd love to do more of this. I'd love to talk about, okay, great. Then you won't have a problem if we automate the order entry piece of it, would you? No. Okay, fine, great. So it's bringing them along and making them recognize that we value them as a team contributor. And quite frankly, we want to make them be able to contribute more to the success of the organization by having a bigger impact by not doing the redundant things. So we're not looking at it as an opportunity to get rid of folks. We're looking at it as a significant opportunity for folks to add more value to the services that we provide to our customers.
Yes. I hear, I just talked to a company last week and they're like 80% of our time in quality is spent on paperwork, and that should not be the case, right? Like that's not what you're hired for. So if you eliminate the pieces of the job that take up the time that really shouldn't be, are not the focus area of what you've been hired to do and what you love, let's be honest, you want to show up every day and do the work you love. I think your point, Jim, of asking, what can we solve to get you back to the work that's the most meaningful, that's going to move the business forward, is so critical.
Yeah.
Angela.
Yeah, I think when you talk about like doing the extra, we call that +1, and everything, we do, like that is part of our culture, is to be able to, everything we do, we should be thinking about +1 and how do we take it one step further. And I know that's hard because people do get stuck in the noise of the day-to-day, right? And so if we can eliminate some of that noise, like, when I think about the goals of what we're trying to accomplish this year, like, I wish we were further along in the things that we've accomplished, but I realize, like, we are getting, there is all this noise that we get sucked into in the day-to-day. Sometimes we're way out in the weeds, and you gotta like try and come back in. And so I think that if we can eliminate some of that, then we're going to be far more successful to the goals that we've put in place for the organization.
Yes.
Great answers. One last question before we wrap up. Anders Green had asked if anyone could name or share a situation where they've captured some sort of data along the way and they didn't have a use for it at that specific moment, but through technology, years later, you've been able to go back to that technology and it's become useful for you in today's time. So do you any situations or thoughts on that?
Back to the data. So if it's all in the data, and it's all the way that you look at the data, right? So Anders, I think probably everyone on this panel agrees that there's power in data, and the value in accumulating it to be able to have different sets of eyes on it for different purposes is amazing. But I think, your point of, and I'm not the one you're looking for the story from, but I'm certainly an advocate for capturing as much insights, again, because it may be beneficial to a key area of your business, an opportunity for growth or assessment, or even a pivot. So I think he's looking for some stories of where there were some aha moments with the data you're capturing. Jim, it looks like you might have one.
Well, I'm going to go back a bit. When we were converting off of our AS 400 machine running FastPack back to the green screen days, we had a ton of data. And it was captured on big old hard drives and tape drives and the like. And when we went over to NetSuite, the thought was, okay, what are we going to do with this data? And the thought process was, okay, we'll just leave it there. And I was under the impression that, look, we don't want to get rid of it because it does show history, it does show trends, it does show some critical information about customers. So let's just put a little process in place to start to pull that stuff into NetSuite so we could reference it when we do our queries in NetSuite. And I tell you, over the course of several months, we put in several years worth of history into NetSuite, and now the trend analysis that we have is not just limited to when we went live with NetSuite. It goes all the way back to the beginning of our relationships with customers, if we want to. So we always try to make it a practice, especially nowadays, that the cost to store data is negligible. Invariably, you'll use it sooner or later. You talk to Google or any of those big boys, and what the value of their organization is based on the just huge amounts of data that they're storing, and they can then use to do some analytics against with some AI tools probably, and help you with your next selection of the gym shoes that you want. So I would always say keep the data stored in an efficient place that you can have access to it from a query tool. and you won't go wrong.
Angela, anything you'd add to that as we close?
I would just say, like, if you have the ability, though, having data outside the system is always a challenge, like, outside of your ERP too. So if you have the ability to have that information, like, in your ERP, so people have access to it, because if, someone has something saved on, some secret SharePoint location, and, they're no longer with the company, like, it's like, how do we get that information? Like, there's, you know that it's out there. So, I just think having, like, information, like, readily available in the system, or people, or if you've done an ERP conversion, how much of that information can you pull over into the new ERP? Because when people have to, like, stop, like, and go back and reference some old Excel spreadsheet or something that someone downloaded information to, again, it creates an inefficiency that people have to stop what they're doing and go and try and find that information. So I would, just as long as, if you can, have as much information readily available in the ERP system.
Yeah. Tim, take us home.
For us, it was more logistical situations. When we were family owned, we didn't have the bandwidth to look into a lot of those aspects of it. Once LSG had bought us out, they helped us to see easy fixes for them with that data that we had for a long time that we just weren't utilizing to the best of its ability. So it was, again, that sense of groupthink that we were in helped us to see from a different perspective just by looking at it differently and then applying that differently. So big wins there for us.
Absolutely. We are at time. I want to thank each of my panelists, and Krista, thanks for managing the questions. This is recorded, so we'll share it. You can refer back to it. I thought it was an amazing discussion. I had a lot of confidence, and thank you all for delivering.
Yep.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks,
Thanks for
Lonnie.
putting it together.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.